Vivid verses.
The message came in on a Tuesday, which is the kind of day nothing interesting is supposed to happen. I was at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside my laptop, working through a set of notes I'd been meaning to organize for weeks. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting something routine, a calendar reminder, a bank notification, the sort of digital white noise that fills a Tuesday morning. It was a LinkedIn message from a woman named Corinne. I hadn't spoken to her in probably 2 years, maybe slightly more. We'd overlapped at a previous role. She was in business development, sharp, always working a room, even when the room was just a corridor. We got along fine, without being particularly close. Congratulations on the new venture, Owen. I've been watching what you're building, and it looks impressive. Let me know if there's ever a chance to collaborate. I think there could be some real synergy there. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and picked up my coffee, which was now definitively cold. New venture. I didn't have a new venture. I wasn't building anything. I was, at that moment, sitting in my kitchen in a slightly worn jumper, eating the last of a packet of biscuits and failing to organize notes. There was no venture. I picked the phone back up and looked at the message again. Watching what you're building. That phrasing, it implied something visible, something public, something she'd found and spent time looking at. I typed back, "Thanks, Corinne. Which venture are you referring to?" Sent. Then I opened a browser and typed my own name in a LinkedIn search bar. The profile loaded in about 3 seconds. I sat very still. The profile photo was one of mine, lifted, I was almost certain, from my actual LinkedIn profile, the one I'd had for years. The name at the top was mine. Beneath it, a business name, Hartwell Advisory Group. The tagline read, "Strategic Consulting at the Intersection of Operations and Organizational Design." I scrolled. The founding narrative was written in first person. My name is Owen Hartwell. With over a decade of experience in operations leadership and organizational transformation, I founded Hartwell Advisory Group to bring enterprise-grade thinking to companies at the growth stage. It went on. Specific employers were named accurately. Specific skills were listed accurately. Specific sectors I'd worked in accurately. Every single credential was mine. Every job, every accomplishment, every area of expertise. The entire professional biography of Owen Hartwell, assembled carefully, presented correctly, and posted publicly, without a single conversation with me. My girlfriend's name was Sasha. We'd been together long enough that the contours of each other's lives had become familiar in the way that happens when two people share significant time. Routines, shorthand, the specific comfort and occasional friction of close proximity. She was between roles, had been for a while, ambitious in the way that sometimes needs a direction to land on. I did not call her immediately. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. The temptation, when something like this lands in your lap, is to react, to reach for the phone, to fire off a message, to let the adrenaline do the talking. I've never found that useful. What's useful is understanding the full shape of a situation before you say a single word about it. So I kept scrolling. Hartwell Advisory Group had 17 followers. It had 4 posts, professional in tone, talking about strategic alignment, organizational resilience, the changing nature of consulting engagements. They were well written. I almost admired the craft of them before I remembered they were written in my name without my knowledge. Sasha was listed as the operations lead. I closed the browser tab. I sat there for a moment and did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I went very quiet inside. Not suppression, clarity. I let the facts arrange themselves into a sequence, a structure, a set of questions requiring answers. How long has this been up? The post had dates. The oldest was 9 weeks ago. Who has seen it? Corinne had. And Corinne wasn't the type to stumble across things. She actively networked, which meant she'd probably found it through a deliberate search or a mutual connection had shared it, which meant others had likely seen it too. What else has happened under this name? That was the question that needed answering before anything else. I spent the next 40 minutes on my laptop. Hartwell Advisory Group had a basic website. I found it through Google, which meant it was indexed, which meant it was findable by anyone who searched for me. The website was clean, professional, and completely unauthorized. It had a services page, strategy consulting, operational review, leadership coaching. It had a contact form. It had a testimonials section that was currently blank, which I noted with grim attention to detail. It had no published case studies. Yet, I pulled out a notepad, actual paper, which is where I do my best thinking, and wrote down everything I knew in a simple list. Profile created without consent. My name, credentials, photo. Active for approximately 9 weeks. At least one former colleague has seen it. Website exists, indexed. Sasha listed as operations lead. Then I wrote a separate question at the bottom of the page, underlined it, and stared at it. Has anything been sold? The answer came not from Sasha, and not from the website, and not from anything I could find through searching. It came from a man named Graham. I found him because of a single detail I'd almost missed on the Hartwell Advisory Group LinkedIn page. A comment on one of the posts, since deleted but still visible in the activity feed, if you knew where to look. Someone named Graham Leach had written, "Looking forward to seeing the deliverables next week. Great to be working with the team." That comment was 6 weeks old. It took me about 20 minutes to find Graham Leach's professional profile and contact information. He was the operations director of a mid-sized logistics company. I drafted an email that was careful, measured, and entirely honest. Dear Graham, my name is Owen Hartwell. I'm reaching out in connection with Hartwell Advisory Group. I've recently become aware of some serious irregularities regarding the operation of that business, and I'm conducting a thorough review. If you've had any engagement with anyone operating under that name, I'd be grateful if you could spare 15 minutes for a call at your convenience. I want to ensure any outstanding matters are resolved properly. I sent it, then went back to the LinkedIn activity feed and looked again. There was a second thread. Someone named Polly Fitch, the founder of a small product company, had been tagged in a post about a successful project kickoff. The post was 4 weeks old. I found her contact information and sent her an almost identical email. Then I made a cup of fresh coffee and waited. Graham called back within the hour. He was cautious at first. Naturally so, because if someone tells you there are irregularities attached to a business you've engaged with, caution is the appropriate response. I didn't blame him for it. I respected it. I engaged Hartwell Advisory Group about 2 months ago, he said. The brief was an operational review. Nothing enormous, but substantial enough. I spoke with the operations lead, Sasha. She was professional, seemed to know her stuff. We agreed a scope, signed a contract, and I paid the deposit. How much was the deposit? I asked. He told me. I wrote it down without reacting. And what's been delivered so far? A pause. That's the issue, frankly. The initial deliverable was due 3 weeks ago. We've had emails, rescheduled calls, explanations about scope refinement. Nothing concrete. Graham, I said, I'm going to be completely straight with you. I'm Owen Hartwell. I am the person whose name and professional history were used to establish that business. I had no knowledge of its existence until this morning. I didn't authorize it, I didn't found it, and I was not involved in the contract you signed. Silence. I understand if you need a moment with that, I said. Right. Another pause. Right. So what does that mean for our agreement? It means I'm going to refund your deposit in full. Today. I'll send a bank transfer by end of business. I'm sorry this happened to you. You engaged in good faith with something that was presented fraudulently, and you've been left waiting on work that was never going to materialize. That's not acceptable, and I intend to make it right. You're not obligated to refund it, he said slowly. You just said you weren't involved. I'm not legally obligated, I agreed. But my name is on it, and I intend to stand behind my name. He gave me his bank details. We ended the call with him thanking me, which was a strange thing to receive given the circumstances, but I understood it. He'd been waiting 3 weeks in limbo, and I'd given him a clean resolution in 15 minutes. Polly Fitch called back 2 hours later. Her tone was warmer than Graham's, but her situation was similar. Contract signed, deposit paid, work not delivered. Hers was a smaller sum. Same principle applied. I told her the same thing. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Honestly, I'd given up hope of seeing that money again. I thought it had just gone." "It hasn't," I said. "I'll send it today." I transferred both amounts before 5 o'clock. Then I sat with the total for a moment. The money was manageable in the sense that it wouldn't cause me hardship, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was refunding money that had been taken in my name from people who had trusted my name for work that was never done. Whatever I felt about that was a secondary concern. The primary concerns were close the damage, protect the name, establish the boundary. In that order. I didn't contact Sasha that night. She called me at 7:30, as she sometimes did, easy and conversational, asking if I'd eaten, mentioning something she'd watched. I talked with her for about 20 minutes. I was present, not cold, not distant. I asked about her day. She didn't mention Hartwell Advisory Group. I didn't bring it up. I needed one more thing before I spoke to her. I contacted LinkedIn through their business integrity reporting channel that evening and began the process of having the Hartwell Advisory Group profile removed on grounds of identity misappropriation. I documented everything, screenshots, post dates, the use of my photo, my credentials, my employment history. I had a reasonable expectation the process would take a few days, but I wanted it initiated before I had the conversation with Sasha. I also sent an email that night to a solicitor I'd used once before for a contract matter. I gave him a summary, factual, clinical, no emotional editorializing, and asked him to prepare a formal letter establishing that I had no association with Hartwell Advisory Group, that my identity had been used without consent, and that any further use of my name, credentials, or professional history in a commercial context would be pursued through appropriate legal channels. He replied the next morning to confirm he'd prepare the letter. Then I called Sasha. "Are you free to talk?" I asked. "Sure, what's up?" "I want to talk face to face. Can I come over this evening?" A slight hesitation. Something in the quality of the pause that was different from her usual. "Yeah, of course. Is everything okay?" "I'll see you at 7. I said. Her flat was tidy when I arrived, which I noticed because it wasn't always. She made an effort. There was wine on the counter. She hugged me when I came in, and I didn't stiffen, but I also registered the gesture for what it was. She knew something was coming, and she was trying to set a tone. I sat down at her kitchen table. Didn't take the wine. She sat across from me. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her hands were doing the thing they did when she was bracing herself. A very slight interlacing of the fingers, a stillness that was a degree too deliberate. "Tell me about Hartwell Advisory Group," I said. She closed her eyes for just a second, then opened them and looked at me directly. I'll give her that. She didn't pretend not to know what I was talking about. "I was going to tell you," she said. "Okay, I mean it. I had a plan for how I was going to present it. I knew it was going to need a conversation, but I wanted to have something to show you first. Something real." I waited. "I've been at a loose end," she said, and her voice was steady but effortful. "You know that. I've been sending applications into a void for months and getting nowhere, and I started thinking about consulting because it's what I know, operations and strategy, and I thought, you have this incredible professional reputation, and if I could just leverage that to get in the door with some clients, I could prove the concept, and then what?" I asked, not harshly, just What was the end of that sentence? And then I'd show you what I'd built, and you'd see it was worth it. Worth what exactly? She exhaled. I knew you'd say no if I asked first. I knew you'd be cautious and want to think about it, and by the time you'd thought about enough, we'd have missed the window, and I made a decision. I looked at her for a moment. She looked back. You made a decision, I said, to create a business using my name. Our business. I thought of it as something we could do together, without telling me, to show you what was possible. I kept my voice even. I had no interest in raising it. Anger is just noise, and noise doesn't accomplish anything. What I wanted was precision. You created a LinkedIn profile using my professional biography, my employment history, and my credentials. You built a website under my name. You positioned yourself as operations lead of a company I knew nothing about. You made contact with potential clients, representing yourself as operating with my authority. You signed 2 contracts. You collected 2 deposits. You delivered nothing. And you did all of this with the deliberate intention of presenting it to me as a fait accompli because you anticipated I would say no. When you say it like that, that's what happened, I said. That's not characterization. Those are the facts. She was quiet. Sasha, I want to understand something. In what version of this does it go well? Walk me through it. You sign the clients. You collect the money. You do what? What were you going to deliver? What were you going to produce for Graham Leach's operational review? I know operations. I've spent years in operations. I could have done it. Could you have? Because Graham Leach has been waiting 3 weeks past his first deliverable date. Her expression shifted. How do you know that? Because I called him yesterday morning, and then I called Polly Fitch. A different kind of stillness settled over her. I refunded both deposits yesterday afternoon, I continued. Out of my own account. Both of them. Because my name was on the contracts, and I will not leave people hanging who engaged in good faith with something presented under my name. Owen, I've also initiated the removal of the LinkedIn profile, and the website will need to come down. And I've engaged my solicitor to prepare a formal letter. She stared at me. Something was moving across her face. I watched it go from disbelief to something harder, and then to something that might have been shame, though I couldn't be certain. You're being very calm about this, she said. What would you prefer? I don't know. Something. This feels like, I feel like I'm being processed. You're being spoken to clearly, I said. I think you deserve that. I'm not going to shout at you. I'm not going to list grievances. I'm going to tell you what happened and what I've done about it. And then I'm going to go home. She set her hands flat on the table. Can I explain myself? You have been explaining yourself. No. Can I explain why I thought it might work? Not what I did wrong, but what I was actually trying to do. I leaned back slightly. Go ahead. She took a breath. I've watched you for a long time. The way you operate. The way people respond to your name, your reputation. You've built something that opens doors before you've even walked into the room. And I've been knocking on doors that don't open. Sending good CVs into silence. Having decent conversations that go nowhere. And I thought if I could just borrow that gravity just long enough to demonstrate that I'm capable, that I could deliver. You thought borrowing it without asking was acceptable. I thought asking would mean being told no before I'd had a chance. And you decided your judgment about what should happen with my reputation outweighed my right to make that decision. She didn't answer that, which was, in a way, the answer. The problem, I said, isn't that you wanted to start a consulting business. The problem isn't that you wanted to work together. If you'd come to me with that idea 6 months ago, or 2 months ago, or 8 weeks ago when you were setting up that LinkedIn page, we could have had that conversation. Maybe it would have gone somewhere. But you didn't. You took a decision about my professional identity, the thing I've spent years building, and you made it yours to dispose of. I wasn't disposing of it. I was trying to use it. Without my consent. Yes. She said it quietly. Without your consent. At least I was honest. And 2 people paid money, I said, and got nothing. And I've had to go to strangers and apologize for something I didn't do because it happened in my name. She looked down at the table. I'm not going to keep going over it, I said. I've said what needs to be said. The profile is coming down. The website needs to come down. I'd prefer you do it yourself rather than me having to force it through other channels. The solicitor's letter will arrive in the next few days, and I'd encourage you to read it carefully. She looked up. Is that it? That's all you have to say? There's nothing else that needs saying. What about us? I stood up. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. You took my name and used it as a tool, I said. You made decisions about my professional future without asking me. You put 2 people in a position where they paid for something that was never going to arrive. And then for 9 weeks, every time we spoke, you said nothing. I paused. I think you know what that means for us. She didn't say anything. I think she'd known, probably, from the moment I'd walked in. I let myself out. It was a cold night. I walked for a while before getting into my car. Not dramatically. I wasn't composing myself or recovering from anything. I simply prefer to walk when I'm thinking, and there was still some thinking to be done. The practical residue of the situation was manageable. I'd established that. The deposits were refunded. The clients were resolved. The profile removal was in process. The letter was being prepared. What I was thinking about, walking in the cold, was something Sasha had said. I knew you'd say no if I asked first. She'd known. She'd understood, in advance, that I would not agree to the use of my professional identity without my involvement and without my consent. She had that knowledge, and she had proceeded anyway, because the anticipated answer was inconvenient. That's not a lapse in judgment. That's a decision about whose judgment matters. I don't spend a lot of time on anger. It's not that I'm incapable of it. I'm not one of those people who claims never to feel it. I felt something walking in the cold. But anger is expensive, and it doesn't purchase anything useful, and the situation was already under control. What remained was just the cleanup. I got in my car and drove. The LinkedIn profile came down 4 days later. I received confirmation from their team that the page had been removed for violation of their policies on impersonation and misuse of professional identity. I saved the confirmation for my records. The website came down 2 days after that. Sasha did it herself, which I noted without comment. The solicitor's letter was sent and confirmed received. I sent her one message. You've been removed from everything associated with my name. Do not use it again. That was all. She sent back a reply that ran to several paragraphs. I read it once, beginning to end, then put the phone down and went and made breakfast. I didn't respond. There was nothing in her message that required a response. She had explained, justified, expressed remorse, asked questions, and left the conversational door open. All of that was understandable. None of it changed anything. I had said what I needed to say and done what I needed to do, and continuing the conversation would have been indulgence. For her or for me, I wasn't sure which. I spent part of the following weekend updating my actual LinkedIn profile. I added a clear, accurate description of my professional experience. I updated my skills and endorsements, which had drifted slightly out of date. I wrote a proper summary in my own voice about my actual work, reflecting genuine things I was interested in and genuinely capable of. I made the profile well-maintained in a way it hadn't quite been before, because up until now I'd been passive about it. I wanted anyone who searched for me to find the real thing and find it clearly. Corinne had messaged again, asking if everything was all right, which was perceptive of her. She'd probably put together that something was off from my first reply, and a week had passed. I replied simply, some unexpected housekeeping needed dealing with. All resolved now. Happy to catch up properly sometime. She sent back a thumbs up and a coffee emoji. That was enough. I called Graham Leach one more time. A brief call to confirm that the refund had cleared and to make sure there were no outstanding questions. He told me it had cleared, that he appreciated the resolution, and that if I ever did move into consulting properly, he'd be open to a conversation. I thanked him for that. I called Polly Fitch too. She was breezier about it, said she'd already moved on, and wished me well. She had a good energy, the kind of person who doesn't carry things longer than necessary. I like that. A few days later, a former colleague named Benedict sent me a message. Not about Hartwell Advisory Group, just a general check-in, the kind of message that circulates between people who've worked together and stayed loosely in touch. He'd seen my updated profile. Good timing on the refresh, he wrote. Profile looks sharp. I smiled at that. Felt like it was overdue, I replied. We made plans to have lunch in the next few weeks. Something I've been meaning to do for a while. What I've found, in circumstances that require you to act with precision under pressure, is that the action itself is clarifying. Not in a dramatic sense. I don't mean that I had some revelation or a turning point. I mean that moving through a problem with care and method leaves you in a cleaner position than you started, even accounting for whatever the problem cost you. I'd lost something. That was real. Whatever Sasha and I had been to each other, it was now finished, and that has a weight to it regardless of how clearly you see the reasons. But I'd lost it cleanly. I'd responded without cruelty, without theater, without leaving loose ends. I'd protected two people who'd been caught in the crossfire. I protected my name. I'd done it all in about a week, quietly, without it becoming a story anyone else needed to be part of. There was a satisfaction in that, not triumph. Nothing about the situation warranted triumph, but the particular quiet satisfaction of having handled something that needed handling. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. The notes I'd been trying to organize the week before were still there, slightly shuffled, waiting for my attention. I pulled them toward me and got back to work. The solicitor confirmed receipt of the letter about 10 days after it was sent. Sasha had signed the acknowledgement, which meant she'd read it and understood the terms. He sent me a copy for my records and noted that in his professional opinion the matter was cleanly documented and I was well positioned if anything further arose. Nothing further arose. I don't think anything will. Not because Sasha is incapable of it. I've revised my assessment of what she's capable of clearly, but because the letter was very specific and very clear, and she is, whatever else she is, intelligent enough to understand what it means. What I think happened, and I've had some time to sit with it now, is that Sasha wanted something badly enough that she convinced herself the wanting justified the method. That's not an unusual failure mode. People do it constantly, in small ways and large ones. They tell themselves the outcome is good enough to excuse how they got there. They tell themselves they'll explain later when there's something to show. They tell themselves the person whose consent they've bypassed would have agreed anyway. Eventually, if only they were less cautious, less slow, less reluctant to take a leap. The leap, in her telling, was the thing. The venture, the vision, the willingness to act. But a leap that lands on someone else's ground isn't courage. It's just trespass. I don't hold on to that. I'm not interested in spending energy on a conclusion I've already reached. What I'm interested in is the next thing and the thing after that, and building something of my own that I can stand behind because I built it myself with full knowledge and full intention from the beginning. That's the only kind of venture worth having. Benedict and I had lunch about 3 weeks later. A small Italian place, the kind with paper tablecloths and no pretensions and very good food. We spent about 90 minutes catching up on work, mutual contacts, the state of various industries we'd both touched in different ways. Toward the end, he said, I heard something about your name being attached to some consulting thing a few months back. Couple people in the sector mentioned it. I nodded. It was a situation, dealt with. He looked at me with the expression of someone who knows not to push but is curious. Everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. Profile's accurate now, if anyone wants to know what I'm actually doing. Good enough for me, he said. He picked up the bill before I could, which started a brief and entirely amicable negotiation that he won. We walked out into the afternoon and agreed to do it again before another 2 years slipped by. I drove home. The radio was on. Something instrumental, a jazz thing I half recognized. The sky was that particular shade of gray that sits between winter and spring, undecided, neither committed to the cold nor willing to give it up. I thought about nothing in particular. I was fine.
Thanks for listening.